Welcome to How Can I Keep From Singing, where we have conversations about the power of singing together. My name is Stuart Stotts, coming to you from rural Wisconsin, and my guest today is Esther Morgan-Ellis. Esther Morgan-Ellis is a historical musicologist who focuses on participatory musical traditions, especially community singing and old-time music making. She's written extensively about the early 20th century American community singing movement. Her research also explores contemporary traditions such as Sacred Harp singing, hymn singing, and revivalist old-time music, examining how communities sustain and reshape these practices over time. As editor and lead author of the open access textbook, Resonances, Engaging Music in Its Cultural Context, she highlights musical traditions from around the world to show how music functions within diverse societies. In both her scholarship and her work as a performer and educator, she emphasizes the social bonds and shared histories that grow out of collective music making. Esther Morgan-Ellis, thank you very much, and welcome to How Can I Keep From Singing?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
What is shape note singing? And in a related question, what is it not?
So it is not a choir, and I think that's the most important and first thing anyone needs to know. Shape note singers gather together maybe every week, every other week, once a month to sing just for the enjoyment of singing together, of being in community. We don't rehearse because we're not preparing for any sort of performance. We also never perform. It's just about singing with people that you love. So shape note singing has a long history in the United States. It descends originally from the singing school tradition of New England, when singing masters roamed the land, holding 2-week singing schools, usually to help rural churches develop choirs. People would learn how to read music and learn how to sing in 3 or 4 parts. It's called shape note singing because today those notes are printed using different shapes that correspond with 4 solfege syllables that help you identify how your note fits in with the other notes. It will take me, I think, a little more time than we have to really explain how that works, but it's a system that helps you to very quickly learn how to sing a melody correctly. It's very successful. It's been used in lots of different contexts over 1,000 years now. And there's different ways of using solfege. In shape note singing, we usually use 4 of those syllables: fa, so, la, and mi. And each syllable corresponds with a shape. Fa is a triangle, so is a circle, la is a rectangle, and mi is a diamond. So right around the year 1800, somebody came up with the idea of using those 4 shapes. And the patent was acquired by a Philadelphia publishing company, and we've used those 4 shapes ever since. In the late 19th century, some people started advocating for using 7 solfege syllables and 7 shapes. So you can also find books that are used today that use 7 shapes. But 4 is a little bit more common, despite being old-fashioned. In fact, I'd say probably because of being old-fashioned.
I'm a musician myself, and I am not really acquainted with this kind of singing, but I did some research, and thanks to you for sending me some resources. I don't really understand the way the shapes work in relationship to Western notation, but we don't need to get into that today. Because apparently it is simple enough. In fact, it was created in part to simplify, if I understand correctly.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I can talk about that in just a few words, because it derives directly from the original solfege system that was developed by Guido of Arezzo, who was a monk in Italy right around the year 1000. And he developed a system of assigning syllables to pitches that goes ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. But then you need to start repeating syllables as you add notes, because he didn't have a concept of scales. And so if you do that, it can go fa, sol, la, because it's the same intervals between the pitches. And then you just have one extra note that you need. And that leading tone, it works really nicely for it to be me. So over the 600 years or so after Guido proposed his 6-syllable system, right around the year 1000, hundreds of other people came up with derivations from that would make it simpler, because when you change up the syllables, it's really complicated. So that 4-syllable system, it dates from 1590s England. And indeed, it is a great simplification of what Guido did. And it met the needs of the time, because the people still weren't thinking in terms of scales. Today, for those of us trained in music, we're like, oh, it's a scale, it's got 7 notes, of course they should have 7 names. But that wasn't obvious until the last 400 years or so, when scales became the way that we started organizing music. So the 4-syllable that goes fa, sol, la, mi, fa.
Okay, but without getting too far into this, how do you know which fa you're singing? Is it the second or the, whatever would be the 5th or something, whatever that would be?
Yeah, for sure. If you want to know, there's a few things you can do. If you read music well enough to identify what the name of the note is, you can tell if it's the tonic of the key, because in the book we use most of the time, the key is actually named in the upper left-hand corner of the page. You can look for mi, and if the mi is right below your fa, then it's the tonic fa. Those would be the 2 easiest ways. But it also doesn't matter too much, because it's all about the relationship between the pitches, not what your scale degree is.
Not an absolute pitch, but a relative pitch.
Oh, and definitely an absolute pitch doesn't mean anything to us. We key everything just by ear at a pitch that will be comfortable for the people in the room right then to sing.
Well, I think I understand it a little bit better, and I'll take your word for it that with a little instruction I could learn. It's certainly a little baffling looking at it from the outside.
It's very hard. And for me, I remember when I first did this in 2009, unbelievably difficult if you're coming from a classical music background and 7-note solfege or that way of thinking about music. It's really easy if this is your introduction to music. If this is the first thing that you learn about how music works, it is a simplified system.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're a performer, I understand, as well as a music professor, an author, and so on. Why are you interested in this? And were you raised in this tradition, or is that something you came to?
Yeah, I was not at all raised in this tradition. I grew up taking cello lessons and a bit of piano and trombone and playing in orchestra. I actually didn't sing at all until I was in choir. I was a cello performance major, but we had a wonderful choir that I really wanted to be a part of. And then in grad school, I just sang in formal performing choirs. So I didn't get into this sort of participatory music making at all until about the last 10 years. But I've always been just really drawn to it, and it didn't even make sense to me until kind of recently in my life. I wrote my dissertation about sing-alongs in movie theaters, and I just found this whole idea of a bunch of people who didn't know each other singing together for 10 minutes as part of the film exhibition program totally fascinating. And then when I moved to Georgia, I got into old time, so I started playing fiddle and banjo in jams, and then I got into shape note singing shortly after that. So now it's all I do, and I don't know how I ever lived without it. I hardly perform at all anymore. I mostly just get together with friends in informal settings and make music. I've met other people like me who are from a classical background and find it so just relieving to be making music just for fun. And it really doesn't matter at all if you sing a wrong note, if you sound bad, if you mess up. None of that's important as long as you're not worsening the experience of the people around you. But that's not what it's about. It's simply about your own enjoyment. And that's just, it's such a delight after decades of it always being about being perfect, being better, and then that accompanying feeling of never having done well enough, even if you did really well, even if you did your best, always feeling like you could and should have done better. And the only time that I walk away from a day of shape note singing wishing I'd done better is if I was distracted and not enjoying myself as much as I could have, which doesn't happen very often.
With your background and interest in singing, I think you should probably be hosting this podcast, because that's exactly what it's about, is this joy of participation that is available to people who are willing to not seek for perfection, but to seek for connection and joy. There's a religious aspect to shape note singing. In fact, I think, is it all religious? Even
right? Yes. Yeah. And so that is something, it is one of the first questions that people often have about it. And it is something that I continue to find fascinating. So yes, there is absolutely a religious aspect. This grows out of a Christian tradition. It's always been interdenominational. It's always been about people with slight disagreements in faith and doctrine coming together and finding community. But yes, the vast majority of the texts in the books that we sing out of are explicitly Christian. And there are also some religious components to singings. The core of what we do are all-day singings and conventions that take place usually on weekends, where people travel often very far to come together for a day of singing. And those invariably, they open with a prayer, they close with a prayer, and there's a prayer for the noontime meal. Religion remains very visible, even as singing sometimes becomes more secular. There also continue to be a lot of people who do experience singing as something that is religious, maybe even think of it as worship personally. However, it is a community of people who come together from all sorts of faith and non-faith backgrounds. At any singing you attend anywhere in the country, and this is maybe more so in the North and less so in the South, but I really don't want to emphasize that distinction because it is true absolutely anywhere. There will be people who are Christians who feel very strongly about the specific texts. There are a huge number of Jewish singers. There are singers from other faith backgrounds, and then there are a huge number of singers who don't profess any faith at all, but who love this for a wide variety of reasons. Some of them maybe grew up in the church and have left it, but continue to have an affection for hymn singing. Many of them are people who find a lot to love in the texts apart from the doctrinal aspect. They are beautiful texts. Often it's beautiful poetry, it's compelling poetry. The main theme of the texts is acknowledging mortality and being prepared for death. That is a big theme of what we do. And it's emphasized not only in the text, but in the memorial lesson, which is an important part of most singings. And that's something a lot of singers, it's something that they want to foreground in their practice of living, no matter what they think happens after you die. And then the music itself is incredibly beautiful and compelling. The style of singing is something that a lot of people really enjoy. It's very different from choral singing. It's an approach to singing in which all voices are welcome, all ways of singing are welcome. And then I think I also want to really emphasize how welcoming the Christian singers are. And again, I think especially in the South, both because that's where I am, and it's because where you're in the South, you're most likely to go to singings that are held in churches, that are hosted by religious communities, that are hosted by religious singers. They are so welcoming of anybody who walks through the door. Nobody will ever ask you what you believe. That's actually, it's pretty strictly against the rules of shape note singing to talk about religion or politics. It's important to be respectful during the prayer. And other than that, there's no policing of beliefs. There's no requirements. You're just welcome. They're happy you're there.
It certainly sounds intriguing to me. I just recently interviewed a Buddhist monk about Buddhist chanting, which is similar and yet quite different. I understand that there is a book, the textbook, as it were, for what you all sing. If I recall correctly, that has recently been updated, but maybe not. That may be what you were talking about, this being a big year. So can you talk a little bit about the texts that people use?
Yeah, so there are at least half a dozen books that people regularly sing out of these days. Definitely the most common is the Sacred Harp. So this is a book, it was first published in West Georgia back in 1844, and it has been in constant use and regular revision ever since then. So it was revised a number of times during the lifetime of the original compiler, Benjamin Franklin White. Then after he died, it split into a couple of different streams of revision. So there's a book, it's referred to as the Cooper revision, that's heavily used in South Georgia and Lower Alabama, but not so much where I am, and also other places for sure. But the main book is what we call the Denson revision, after some of the early 20th century revisers. It was revised throughout the 20th century. I, so far, have mostly sung out of the 1991 revision, which was the main revision, up until September of 2025, when the long-awaited 2025 revision came out. So this was like a truly epochal event in many ways. 700 singers from around the world and Europe, Australia, came to Atlanta in September for the launch of this new book, which was a real testament to how much people care about this and how many people wanted to be there. And I also have, I have many dozens of friends who weren't able to be there. So this is just it's a drop in the singing community bucket. 700 people made this trip and sang for 2 days out of this book. The revision ended up being a real overhaul of the contents. 77 songs were cut from the book. In many cases, because they were almost never used, and in a few because the committee thought for other reasons that they weren't appropriate or ideal for inclusion in the book. And that gets really complicated, and I can't really speak on their behalf. But that made room for the addition of 113 new songs, most of which are by living singers. So I think there's now, I think it's 55 living composers represented in the book. And that includes a lot of young people. It includes people from around the world, from England, Germany, Australia, Canada, and all parts of the United States. And it includes, again, singers with lots of faith backgrounds, although the texts themselves are mostly traditional texts, lots of Isaac Watts. Lots of what you would expect to find. And all the songs are written in a very traditional style. They sound, for the most part, like they could have been in one of those 19th century revisions.
I can only imagine the level of discourse and agreement and undoubtedly disagreement in shaping that new revision, trying to keep what's traditional and powerful, recognizing that it's going into the modern world, all of those things. I'm sure that was a long, drawn-out conversation.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, the process was extraordinary and took, I think, 7 years, depends exactly how you want to count, but a very long time. It was very important to the committee that there be buy-in throughout the process, that people feel involved and represented, ultimately so that there'd be good feeling about the revision and that everyone would adopt it and there wouldn't be any schisms as there have sometimes been in the past. So one of the things they committed to do, there was an open call for recommendations for new songs. And they could either be songs that were out there in the world, that were in other books, but not in this book, that folks thought should be in the Sacred Harp, or they could be new compositions. And it ended up that singers submitted over 1,100 songs. And the committee resolved to record every single one of those songs with a good group of singers. So they did that over years across about a dozen different all-day singings. They recorded every single song. They reviewed them all. They rated them. They had a real complicated system for deciding what the finalist songs were. Then they picked about a little less than 200 songs as finalists, which were recorded again with notes and words. And this was all anonymous as well. And then they reviewed those again and finally came down to choosing the final songs that would be added. So everyone in the community had every opportunity to make recommendations, both about the songs and then about other aspects of the book.
How many songs made it into the book?
So it was 113 songs were added out of, so about 10% of what was suggested.
You're listening to How Can I Keep From Singing? My name is Stuart Stotts, and my guest today is Esther Morgan-Ellis. Let's talk a little bit about the actual experience of singing. From what I know, which is not much, there are 4 sort of sections. People take turns calling out songs for which one will be led. There's a sense of steady beat to it. There's also a lot of energy. And one of the quotes I got from the film that you sent me was, "If you can hear your neighbor, you're not singing loud enough." And I have a friend of mine who I mentioned that this would be a topic of one of the podcasts. And I told her about, shape note singing. She goes, "Oh," she said, she was kind of joking. She said, "That's mostly just shouting," which I don't think it is, but it was interesting, that perception. And certainly volume is a big part of it. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to be part of this singing.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've touched on all the important things there, and I'll take them in order. So yes, we sit in 4 sections for the 4 parts: treble, alto, tenor, bass. The 4 sections are set up in what we call the hollow square. So they're all facing each other and facing this inward point. That's really important because there's no place for an audience to sit, because there's no audience. Sometimes at singings, you'll have people who come in and sit in the back or the corner and listen, and that's fine. But the best place to hear the music is from the center of the hollow square. And that's very intentional and significant. So the center of the square is where the leader stands, and they face the tenor section, which has people of all genders singing the melody in whatever octave is comfortable. The same thing's true of the treble section. So both of those sections usually have singers in both the high and low octaves. Anybody who wants to lead will have an opportunity. If it's a formal all-day singing, probably when you walk in the door, there'll be an arranging table where you can fill out a card that has your name and any other relevant information, and you indicate that you want to lead. And then the arranging committee at some point will call you into the square to lead. So you choose the song you want to sing. You face the tenors. There'll be someone in the front bench who can give you a key for your song, so give all the starting notes if you don't want to do it yourself. And then you lead the song, and it goes the tempo that you want it to go, and you pick what verses it's going to be. So the leader has total authority over deciding how that's going to sound. And it's the job of the class that's what we call the group of singers. It's a remnant of that singing school tradition. The class wants to give the leader the best experience that they can to make them just feel really happy about standing there in the middle. So everybody has that opportunity to get in the middle. We love for new people to stand in the middle. You can either go up with an experienced leader just to hear the sound, or if you want to try leading by yourself and you're not feeling confident, that front bench, as they're called, of tenor singers, one of their jobs is to help the leader, to give a really clear indication of the beat, to sing loudly and confidently, and to make sure that it goes really well, even if the leader isn't really certain about what they're doing. So we really want newcomers taking that position right from the start. And yes, it's loud. It's loud. There's a handful of dynamic markings in the Sacred Harp, just a few special places where maybe you get quiet for a few seconds. But the standard is you're singing as loud as you can or as loud as you want to. Not everyone shouts pretty much all of the time. It's not clear that that's always been the way that people sang, but as far back as we have recordings, you can hear these roomfuls of just exuberant, untrained, but very confident and very loud singers giving it their all. And it's an important part of the experience. Again, we're not looking for blend. We're not following the nuances of the phrase. There's no conductor giving elegant little gestures. It's about this feeling of togetherness that comes from, again, the fact that the music has a pulse is also really important. There is always a strong sense of pulse, of rhythm, and then of togetherness that comes from engaging with that.
It sounds exhilarating and exhausting at the same time. If someone is interested in finding shape note singing to be part of it, of course, the internet is our go-to resource. Are there particular things that you would recommend?
Yeah, so the internet is your go-to resource. Most people are not too far from a shape note singing group. You yourself, I looked up, there's an active group in Madison, Wisconsin. They seem to meet the first and third Saturdays. Most groups have a website, and it's probably called Sacred Harp town or city, or I like calling it shape note singing out of my respect for singing friends who primarily sing out of other books. I have friends who primarily sing out of the Christian Harmony or the the New Harp of Columbia, but they call it old harp singing. It's not very nice to call those people sacred harp singers because they use other books. However, most people do sing out of the Sacred Harp, and that is something that happens a lot. Most groups are Sacred Harp groups, and especially outside of the South. If you Google Sacred Harp in your state or a major nearby city, it's very likely you'll find the webpage for that group. Most groups have Facebook pages, and there's a couple wonderful websites that catalog all of the singings either in a region or, in one case, the entire world. I can share that with you if you like. It's called Shape Note Singings. Every group is totally open to anybody who wants to show up. Newcomers are joyfully welcomed. Lots of groups will have materials to help you get oriented right away, or might start with a lesson for newcomers. So it's easy to get involved if it's something that you want to do. This is within reach of almost anybody.
I will put links to those resources in the notes for this episode. I realize that we haven't said the origin of the term sacred harp, which, as I understand it, simply refers to the human voice as being the sacred harp.
Yeah, that's always been my understanding. Although I think there's some people who have other ideas about exactly where that term comes from, and it's not super clear. A lot of the texts are versifications of the Psalms, mostly by Isaac Watts. And so, of course, there's also this connection with the Harp of David. It's certainly true if you look at titles of 19th century tune books, and there were a lot of them. The Sacred Harp was one book in a crowded field of oblong shape note tune books. Lots of them have harp in the title, so it's very common. And there's some people who like being called harp singers, which I like.
I like the image of the sacred harp, wherever it comes from. There's something very evocative. Esther, I want to thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. I know that for myself, it really makes me want to go and be part of something like this.
I am always so happy to talk to anyone about shape note singing. It is absolutely the joy of my life, and I've watched it transform other people's lives. It is not for everyone. Most singers will tell you that, like, as soon as you hear it, you'll have a reaction one way or the other. Some people immediately are like, oh, what is this? I have to do this. I have to be involved with this. And other people just can't stand it. And that's fine. But for people who love this, it can become so important and really very quickly. And not so much because of the music, but because of the community. The people who get involved in shape note singing are almost invariably just wonderful people, warm and generous and interesting. It's just a really special community. I feel like I hear so much these days about this epidemic of loneliness, and especially adults not being able to make friends. And I just can't even imagine what that's like. Because if you're a shape note singer, you have hundreds of friends and you see them regularly. It's just something that you look forward to all the time. I'm always thinking about that next singing that I get to go to where I get to see all of my friends who just mean so much to me. And it's a community that's just waiting for anybody, because all are welcome.
Your enthusiasm is infectious. So I really appreciate talking with you here today. As I say, I'll put the links to resources in the notes for someone who might be interested.
Thank you.